It was March 2nd, 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama. The bus driver pulled the bus over and radioed to the police for help. Here's the personal testimony of what happened next. I will forewarn you that it does contain a harsh racial slur. One of the officers said to the driver in a very angry tone, "Who is it?" The motorman pointed at me. I heard him say, "That's nothing new. I've had trouble with that thing before." He called me a thing. They came to me and stood over me, and one said, "Aren't you going to get up?" I said, "No, sir." He shouted, "Get up!" again and again. I started crying, but I felt even more defiant. I kept saying over and over in my high-pitched voice, "It's my constitutional right to sit here as much as that lady. I paid my fare. It's my constitutional right." I knew I was talking back to a white policeman, but I'd had enough. History had me glued to the seat. It felt as Harriet Tubman's hands were pressing down on one shoulder and Sojourner Truth on the other. But one cop grabbed hold of my hands and his partner grabbed the other, and they pulled me straight out of my seat. My books went flying everywhere. I went limp as a baby. I was too smart to fight back. They started dragging me backwards off the bus. One of them kicked me. I kept screaming over and over, "It's my constitutional right." I wasn't shouting anything profane. I never swore. Not then, not ever. I was shouting out my rights. It just killed me to leave the bus. I hated to give that white woman my seat when so many black people were standing. I was crying hard. The cops put me in the back of a police car and shut the door. They stood outside and talked to each other for a minute. Then one came back and told me to stick my hands out the open window. He handcuffed me and then pulled the door open and jumped in the back seat with me. I put my knees together and crossed my hands over my lap and started praying. All ride long, they swore at me and ridiculed me. They took turns trying to guess my bra size. They called me a nigger bitch and cracked jokes about parts of my body. I recited the Lord's Prayer and the 23rd Psalm over and over in my head, trying to push back the fear. While this civil rights conflict over the segregation of city buses in Montgomery, Alabama, did not occur on Good Friday, this woman's recounting her echoes the humiliating poetry of Isaiah, or indeed the narrative of the Passion Gospel. Of course, this sounds like a story you might know well, and you'd be forgiven for thinking that this was Rosa Parks. I'm afraid that it's not. Sadly, this is a scenario that happened numerous times to many unnamed individuals without any reporting in the media and certainly no civil rights movement. These are the words of Claudette Colville, a 15-year-old who was arrested 9 months before Rosa Parks, and whose arrest, like many before her, did not launch a bus boycott or spark national interest that might create the groundswell for a civil rights movement. Of course, the same was true 2,000 years ago. There's no doubt that there were many other religious leaders and failed political activists who were crucified before and after Jesus. So what was it about Jesus and his message that caught on? So much so that we have come to call this particular Friday good. These days we speak a lot about things trending or going viral. And usually we're talking about social media or the way that celebrity influencers create marketing crusades. But we have just observed how fast a literal virus can spread across the entire globe and send it to a grinding halt, seemingly overnight. Have you ever wondered how it happens? Why some ideas spread virulently while others quietly die on the vine? Clearly, it has something to do with the systems that we live in, the systems that shape our world for us, and the groups of people, the networks that can come together to keep that message going, or perhaps to stop it cold. Take, for instance, Caiaphas and Annas. It's easy to reduce them to cartoon villains, complete with dark, curly mustaches and with German or Russian or Arabic accents, depending on whom we find most threatening at the moment. But have you ever stopped to wonder what they might have been feeling? Does Caiaphas really believe that the masses will follow Jesus, which in turn will incite Roman authorities to destroy the beloved temple? Does he think that handing Jesus over to Pilate is right? Or is it just merely expedient? Sometimes we know the story so well that we don't ask questions about it. We assume we know the answers. Which is why we have to ask ourselves, are the religious leaders who yell for Jesus' death duplicitous when they say they believe Jesus is a threat and a criminal? Or what they saying they think is true? Of course, the text doesn't tell us. It doesn't give us that insight. And so we have to look to our own present day for clues. Let's take a look at Jake Pert for a minute. He was among the nearly 1,000-person mob that stormed the Capitol on January 6th in 2021. At his sentencing hearing, he told the judge that he was driven by a state of desperation, a conviction that the presidential election had been stolen and the country he loved was falling apart. He said, "I felt like we were at a battle, standing up for our country." Of course, Pert is more than a mere mob member. He's a person. He's a 47-year-old real estate agent, a husband, and a father of 5. And in 2013, Andrea Milholm was driving drunk and struck Pert's sisters, Krista and Kelsey, as they walked along a Denver street. Krista was killed instantly, and Kelsey was seriously injured. Milholm was sentenced to 5 years in prison. And while she was in prison, Jake wrote her monthly letters of encouragement and notes of forgiveness. After a year of incarceration, she was eligible for transfer to a halfway house. And Jake Pert wrote the judge a letter in favor of her early release, saying, "I want what will be most beneficial to Andrea." Of course, Pert is a good person. And yet we know that merely being good isn't enough. It doesn't provide protection from being led astray or manipulated by others. Being good does not inoculate us from the evil forces or the influences of the systems that seek to wield us. On Good Friday, if not on any other day, we must pause to notice the ways that evil can be turned into good. On this day, I've come to realize that evil is what we're really up against. Evil is as much a character in this gospel story as any of the other characters that have names. It slithers through the streets, hissing lies and breathing hate. Evil's at work in the Roman occupation, which creates the very context in which Jesus' life and ministry cause anxiety for some of the religious leaders. Caiaphas and Annas did not take on their positions of authority in order to cut down an innocent man. No, their aim was to protect the faith and maintain an institution, one that did much good. And yet evil uses people's anxieties and fears and prejudices to twist good intentions into cruel deeds. John's gospel itself has been, for some, a tool of anti-Semitic hatred. It's why we routinely translate what in the text says Jews into Judeans. Because the way John writes the gospel, it almost makes no sense half the time, because they're all Jews, and yet he singles out the Jews as if they were some evil party. The Holocaust showed us that people who participate in the atrocity of genocide, the people who slaughter neighbors, friends, colleagues, and even family members, are not bad people. They're no much different than you and I. According to scholars, they do not turn off their moral compass. They don't act badly, intentionally. It's rather that their moral compass gets redirected. The natural inclination to protect their own gets warped by lies. They come to believe